Now it is a great pleasure to hand over this session to my colleague João Cardoso. João was a PhD at Técnico, and he was working in data management plans, and in that context he has been working with biodata for a long time now. He is one of the instructors of our program Ready for Biodata Management data management plans, and he has recently moved to FCT/FCCN, and it is in that quality that he is here with us today to guide you through data management plans. So João, thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you. So good afternoon to everybody. I think we can say it's good afternoon because it's past midday now. Although I expect none of us have had lunch yet. So I'll be talking about data management plans, and after that I'll be doing a training course. Well, more or less, it's an exercise on how to create a data management plan. But mind you, I expect that some of you have already seen this exercise. I recognize some faces, but the idea is not to do a fully fledged data management plan, but a conceptual one. So we'll go over the concepts that make up a data management plan, and you'll be able to contribute with your ideas, which should be interesting. So let's start with the first presentation, which is the introduction of data management plans. And after that, we can do a more interactive side of things, so where you'll engage a bit more. So let me try and share my screen. It should be on right now. I expect most of you should be able to see this, so let's get on with it. Okay, again, as Anna correctly stated, my name is João Cardoso. So I am currently affiliated with the FCCN, and specific with its scientific computing unit. Although what I'm bringing you today is not directly influenced by my work there. It is about data management. Okay, so the problem that we're facing with, you've already been exposed to this earlier on today, but it is indeed an exponential growth in the number of researchers and their ability to produce data. So how do we make research data available so that it can benefit the community? And obviously, one of the solutions that has been found is through open access, and in particular, the adoption of open science and necessarily open access later on as one of the concepts within open science as a whole. And obviously, through the adoption of the fair data principles. I'm not going to hammer into you anymore what these concepts are. I think other presentations have done it better than I could, so I will not go there. I'll hammer the concept of DMPs, and in Portuguese they would be called Planos de Gestão de Dados, PGDs. We'll keep to English, so it's data management plan for me. And the data management plans are documents that are used to support planning and the execution of data management activities. And they are formally expressed. The metaphor that I usually use to describe data management plans to someone who has never been exposed to the concept is that of a restaurant technical sheet. So in a restaurant technical sheet, you have a document that explains how you can prepare a certain dish. In a data management plan, you should be able to realize how data is managed, and in specific research data. So what is the definition of data management plan? It is a document that details practices and methods that are applied throughout all of the stages of the data lifecycle. And here you have the data lifecycle as it is described in RDM kit. It is comprised of these 7 stages. So obviously, some people define it as having more, but I like to stick with this definition of the data lifecycle. And the reason why do we exactly need data management plans? And for this, I like to use the carrot and stick metaphor. So are good. Positive reinforcement side of thing, where it is a motivation to have a DMP, and then there is the carrot side of the stick side of it, which is okay, you're sometimes forced to have it due to that. So on the motivation side, on the carrot side, obviously it is good to have the data management plans because it helps us to adequately allocate resources, and these might be financial, computational, or even human resources. So it forces us to think ahead and plan how we're going to be using our resources. Obviously, the second part of that is that when planning, you can plan to comply with the fair data principles. So how is your data going to be found? How is it going to be accessed? Is it going to be interoperable? Will you be allowing reuse? And the third positive side of things of why you should have a DMP is due to its potential for automation. Because in essence, you are aggregating all of the knowledge that you have on how your data is going to be managed on a single document. Obviously, if you just create a human readable document, it is of little use other than to the reader. But if you create a machine readable data management plan, then it could become an asset that can be used in other activities and to accelerate and simplify the research process. Then we have the state side of things. So obviously, you've already been told that funding bodies are encouraging the submissions of data management plans. And this has been progressing from a stage of where they were simply encouraging it to one where they'll start requiring it. So data management plans will stop being a suggestion and will start being a requirement. And obviously, for funding bodies, the whole point here is to realize how are you complying with the fair data principles. And this will lead inevitably to monitorization and validation of the quality of your document and its fair data compliance. So this is not something that is happening right now, but this is where things will go in the future, in the near future. Again, it is limited to non-existent. However, it is going to take effect, and funding bodies are working on that. So there is work going on to enact monitorization of submitted data management plans. And this leads us to what should be in a DMP. And I like to categorize it as having 8 different conceptual parts. So project description, then we describe the existing data that we've created, we characterized how it is organized, we define our preservation and access policies, any licenses or ethic issues that apply, then we have a definition of the available resources and the responsibilities from the people who help manage them, and in the end we have all of the associated data management costs. So let's start with the first, the project description. And project description, again, should be a summary of it should contain a summary of the project. Obviously, typically DMPs are submitted alongside with a project proposal. So it is not necessary to be a very detailed project description, but it should have some description of the project to which it is associated. Specifically, it should describe goals, any specific methodologies. It should define the context. Again, and it should also characterize the sources of funding for this project because they are important in the grand scheme of things. Then we move on to the characterization of existing data. And this basically means identifying all the sources of data within the project. So either if we are reusing existing data that we've created in the past, or if we are reusing data from a third party, or if we are just simply creating new data. So we should identify existing data. And then this implies describing the sources of said data, its volume, any licenses that apply, and obviously costs that come with that. But obviously costs, we can focus about that in the end. Then we move on to created data. So data that will be creating or generating throughout the project. And again, all of this created data should be described within the DMP, and this means not just a generic description, as the DMP should be perceived as a living document that accompanies the project from its onset to its inevitable end. So the description of the data should also change over time and should ideally become ever more detailed. But in all scenarios, in a generic way, we can describe the methodology of how data is to be created, what types are being created, and its volumes. Why is the volume important? Mostly due to what happens in the preservation and dissemination policies of the access policy. And then we move on to data organization, which basically means identifying how the data that you're creating or reusing is organized. So what metadata schemes are applied, and these must be identified. So typically metadata schemes, in some areas there are standardized metadata schemes that should be used. In other areas that is not the case. Regardless, you should provide a description of the logic in which on how you are organizing your data. And this is important due to the fair data principles, because if you want to reuse said data, it is important to get the context of how it's organized. So, and also we should also focus on the representations. Describing the data format on how the data is organized is very important. Me specifically, and this can be a concern mostly on the creating data part. You should focus on having data formats that are not proprietary, because obviously you will be impacting reusability if you are using proprietary data formats. And to finalize, all data structures should also be defined, any that apply. We go on to the preservation and access policy. And this basically means, or in this conceptual area of the DMP, we should be describing how we'll be preserving and storing data, not only throughout the creation and analysis process, the part of the project, but also after the project ends. So how will we be preserving, and how long will we be doing so? And where will we be hosting the data? Who is going to be able to access it? What are the conditions of access? And all of this, we call it the preservation and access policy. So for each set of data, or let's call it the data set that you create, you should have in mind that you will need to enact a preservation and access policy. And preservation and access policies can be as simple as, okay, we're just going to allow everyone that wants to access our data, or we won't allow anyone to access our data. But the definition of the policy must exist. So there mustn't be ambiguity in it. And we move on to the license and ethics. So for every data set that you create or reuse, obviously licenses apply. And you might be even having to deal with ethical issues. Let's say in the life science discipline, if you are dealing with human data, obviously ethical issues apply to the data, and these need to be described so that anyone in the future, or anyone willing to use your data, even if it is part of the team's project, the project team, is aware of that these issues exist. And obviously that impacts the license which you select or use to associate with the data, so to regulate its usage. Obviously, if you are, and sometimes this can dwell into almost a ideological discussion to which license should you apply if you're being funded by a public entity. Some people say that we should go with non-commercial. Some other people say that it is a public good, or it is, as data is publicly funded, it should be public property. So commercial licenses should be applied. It is a very deep topic. We can go as deep as we want in any of these generic categories, but selecting the right license is as important. Moving on to resources and responsibilities. So it is obviously fundamental to involve all of the resources within the project and to have those resources listed on the DMP. And these vary from computational or material resources. Let's say we are using a data center to computate analysis, to analyze certain data sets that we produce. These must be listed. These let's call them technical resources must be identified. The same thing goes for people, for our human assets. So people responsible for data management activities should be also identified and then associated with said activity. This obviously enables us to have traceability over the whole process. So we can correctly identify who was responsible for what and what was used to perform a given activity. And finally, we go to the costs, because in the end, everything comes down to costs, and all the costs should be identified, but only those that pertain data management activities. Obviously, a project has its own budget. This is when we are applying for funding. The project budget must be generic, or sometimes as specific as it needs to be. But in terms of the DMP, we're only concerned with costs associated with data management activities. And this concludes those 8 generic categories of the DMP, and we move on to the current reality of DMPs. What are DMPs today actually like? Are they anything like the conceptual idea that should be? And the reality is that yes and no. So we have some issues with the current state of DMPs. So, and I'll talk a bit about some of the problems that there are. So one of the biggest ones is the lack of consistency. And the lack of consistency mostly derives from the expertise of the creator. So if you have a creator that is an expert on DMP creation and has created many DMPs before, knows exactly what the funding agency is looking for, then you might have a high quality, low granularity DMP. If on the opposite side of things, you have somebody who's just dealt with this bureaucratic task and doesn't have a lot of context to guide them, you might get a low quality, high granularity DMP. So there is lack of consistency within the board, and obviously this is not good. Another important aspect is the accessibility of DMP documents. So for the longest time, people would create a DMP and then would keep it to themselves. They would submit it obviously to the funding agency, but there was no publication. So people wouldn't be able to compare their DMPs to others. And this is a problem because, again, it has an impact on the consistency and on the reusability. And in order to address these issues, obviously there were data management guidelines instituted by several funding bodies. And this typically results in the creation of DMP templates, which, again, they gather information, and typically DMP templates are expressed in a questionnaire-like format. So, and I've put in this slide both the European Commission icon and the Science Europe, because these are the two of the most widely used DMP templates in Europe. Our very own template at the FCT is based on the Science Europe. So as you see, there is some variation of that, but obviously all of these DMP templates are created with only one interest in mind, which is to serve the funding body's interests. They're not designed to assist the researcher on doing the actual research. They're not designed to facilitate his work and to help him with his data management activities. So there is this lack of let's call it, there is a sort of a conflict of interests here. So on one side you have the funding body who wants to collect information on the project, on how the project is managing its data, but that doesn't necessarily benefit the researcher who's actually doing the work. And so there is this conflict. And again, and a very good example was the DMP template for the Horizon 2020, which focused almost exclusively on how would researchers comply with the fair data principles. And but at the same time, there was no clear definition on what were the preservation and access policies. No clear definition of different data sets. So everything was a bit mixed together, and obviously this added to the confusion, and any specific knowledge on the other than how the researchers were complying with the fair data principles had to be inferred. So it was not explicit. You would have to go over the document and infer a lot of information from it. This is obviously not ideal. Again, adding to the confusion, multiple distinct DMP templates can create a lot of chaos. So if you're applying for funding by the European Commission, then you have to do a Horizon template. Then if you're applying for the, let's say, the FCCN, you have to do a Science Europe-based template. These are different, they're distinct, although they share similar traits, but this adds to the confusion on the research community. Again, the second part is none of these documents, once submitted, typically go through a verification and evaluation process. As such, they don't have any consequence to the researchers, and they perceive the perception as a result is that the data management plans are just a bureaucratic hassle, and they're not a fundamental tool for data management on the day-to-day. Again, this leads to if you don't reinforce the cycle, then what ends the end result is a lot of static documents that people do because they have to comply with regulations, and they rarely update them or publish them. So this is the current reality. It has been for a while, although obviously this is changing. And this is, I'm trying to find the gold here in the DMPs, and the idea is the combination of all the issues that I've identified, and I've really painted a very grim image on the DMPs, have led to poor quality and low value DMPs. And this has impacted the community and a lot of people, although they recognize the necessity of DMPs, they sometimes fail to recognize their value. You will hear, oh yes, DMPs are very important, but not very few people will be able to tell you how will they be using DMPs in their day-to-day, other than just to comply. And so ideally, DMPs should have at least these 5 key features. They should be easily created. DMPs should not be hard to create. They should be frequently updated as a result. They should follow a standard, and they obviously should have both a human and a machine readable representation. And finally, they should all be as accessible as possible. So what is being done by the community to invert this trend and to address these issues? Well, the first step was to standardize the knowledge contained in DMPs, and to that effect, I'm pointing out the RDAs, the Research Data Alliance DMP Common Standards Working Group, which its objective was solely to define what would be an interoperable version of a DMP. So the minimal set of concepts that could define a DMP and that could be used to then represent DMPs and have different organizations share DMPs amongst themselves and use them as an interchange format, a common language in a sense. And so this was obviously the starting point for further extension. So let's say that we have a data management plan, and then we can extend it to cater for a specific context, and doesn't need to be a very, we don't need to change this common standard. And I'm just going to be showing you a very brief generic idea of what the standard entails. It's comprised of 13 core terms. And this obviously defines the minimum set of universal terms. This is obviously not going to go through the schema, but it is just for you to get an idea of what the concept entails. And the second part, obviously, it's how do you make DMP creation easier? And the answer to this was the creation of DMP creation tools. And you might be familiar with some of these, and you might have used some of these. They are typically online based, so they're web applications, most of them. And some of them are actually independent, others are associated with funding bodies, others are associated with international projects. What they all have in common is that they try to make DMP creation easier, and they try to avoid, some of them obviously, avoid the DMP template concept. So they try to avoid that, and in particular, I like to point out the Data Stewardship Wizard, which is DSW. It's very, it has its origins in the Elixir project, and we have used it here at Biodata. We've used it as a starting point for training on how to create DMPs. Now I'm going to take off my Biodata hat and put on my FCC and FCT hat, and I'm going to say that Argos is the tool that we're looking to promote going forwards for the Portuguese community, and it is, both of them are very good tools. We just happen to like Argos a bit better because we feel like it serves it serves the community a bit better. And not trying to take too long, but the community, the Portuguese research data management community is going to do some training on this tool in particular as well. Moving on, the final step was obviously to have machine actionable as well as human actionable representation of DMPs. And this is important because if you have a machine readable representation of the DMP, then you can start to do automation on top of that with that knowledge that is represented in the DMP. And two particular popular languages were specifically used. So on one side you had JSON representation. For those of you who actually know what it is, it's an XML-like markup language, and the other one is OWL, which is based on semantic technology, which allows you to infer knowledge. I'm not going to go too deep into the technicalities, but in essence, having the DMPs represented as a machine actionable DMP allows you to have these 5 key added value. So you enable the exchange of information between systems. You allow the integration of data management plans in research data management workflows. You are enforcing the persistent identification of records and artifacts, and you're obviously facilitating both the creation and updating processes. And these are important aspects that can be done with automation. Just a quick publicity on Biodata. So all of these topics that I'm covering today are covered by a very good program that Biodata has, which is the Ready for Biodata Management program, in which they are teaching 2 courses. I'm obviously one of the lecturers, which is the Introduction to DMP course, where participants are presented the basics of data management and data management plans, and then we are going to get a bit of this later on in this session. So we're going to be creating a DMP based on a fictitious project. And then you have the advanced DMP creation course where you're actually guided in the creation of a real life DMP using one of the DMP creation tools. And you are even encouraged to bring your own data. So in conclusion for this first stage of this session, DMPs are formal documents that describe methods, practices that are applied throughout the research data lifecycle. They help you adopt good RDM practices and in particular comply with the fair data principles. They are most definitely an important tool for RDM planning and allocation of resources in your RDM activities, of course, and they have the potential to enable automation of said activities. Obviously, this is future work because currently there are not a lot of services built on top of DMPs, but they will come, and it's not too far in the future. And this is this first stage of the presentation finished. I don't know if you have any questions on this first. I don't know if we can take any questions. And are we too late, or are we on track?
Well, I don't know what you have left, and you have until 1 o'clock for the morning session. Yes. But there was a question in the chat that I already also transposed to the minutes. It is from Liliana Rodrigues. Liliana, would you like to phrase it?
Ligia. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Ligia. Are you there? Because I'm not sure if she's there because she left for a while, right? So I'll read it because I think it is important. She says that at the moment, the sources of funding are more checking if an application has or not foreseen a DMP. At least I feel that you can use any DMP, one size fits all. That will do the job. From your presentation, it seems that this will change soon, right? What is being done regarding, for instance, the monitoring of these DMPs?
Yeah, well, I can speak from my experience and not necessarily, I cannot go into a lot of detail on what we're doing for the FCT, but what I can tell you is that having data management plans on our side, we've realized that it is very hard to actually validate if the information portrayed in the DMP is actually correct and it is being applied. Obviously, you can have validation sessions, you can go in depth on that, but on a small scale that might work, but in a national scale, it's a bit more complex than that. So, and especially in the FCT, we must always worry about scale. And so I think it will have to be inevitably an automated process. So monitorization will have to be based on the automation. And in order for that to happen, there must be wide adoption of the machine actionable data management plan concept. And so our first steps are towards that. Not necessarily mandating monitorization by now, but on the start, but on the first phase, it will most likely be, okay, we are going to be requiring data management plans. Here are the tools which you can use to create them. And those tools already create machine actionable data management plans. And so, and services will be built on top of that. And this is progressive effort. So in time, we will get to simple monitorization on if you are submitting a DMP and if the DMP checks all of the boxes that are necessary. Let's say on the second stage, maybe we can go a bit further and try to assess if those boxes are actually being enacted in reality. It is an ongoing process. There is a lot of work, not just ours, on that area. I think I don't know if I've answered the question. I think I have. It is an ongoing work, monitorization in essence.
Thank you, João. Is there any other question that someone would like to do now, or can João move on to? Okay, João, go ahead, please.
The second part of this presentation is a bit more interactive. So we will be doing a DMP exercise. So in essence, we'll be creating a DMP based on a project. And the idea is that we'll have, well, I'll start with a presentation. Go from there, I'll just introduce the exercise. So again, data management plan exercise. Again, just to further publicize the ready for data management, these slides are based on that program. So if you have not checked it out, please do. So the exercise for this, the rest of this session is based on a very good exercise that was introduced in ready for data management, in which we create a DMP, and you as participants will be creating a DMP now based on a mock project. And we follow a DMP creation methodology that is based on those 8 stages, generic stages or conceptual stages of the DMP that I've mentioned in the introduction. And originally this would be done in a face-to-face meeting. We would have this canvas as it is displayed here. And then our participants would be writing the information down on post-its and gluing the information on the canvas, so as to create a visual data management plan. And then you would be able to ask for help from the experts, which would be me and Daniel Ferry, and help will be provided. We'll not be doing that precisely. What we'll be doing is I have a virtual canvas in which you can contribute with ideas, and I'll be doing the filling of the canvas, and we'll be discussing each of the steps amongst ourselves. We're just 20 people, so it shouldn't be too hard for everybody to be able to contribute to a certain extent. And again, three ideas to keep in mind. So DMPs are living documents, so we can always go back and change some ideas as our perspective changes. We should not be trapped by previous decisions, and not all information is explicitly described in the project. So going from this, I think I've linked the exercise guides in the agenda document. It is here under project guides. So if you open that, you'll be sent to this document here, which basically
João, can you share the link, please? Because we have not yet shared the links to the presentations with the participants.
Okay,
we'll do it by the end of the day. Thank you.
I'll put it on the... Do not feel daunted by the extension of the document. We're going to go over it in small sections. For now, I would like you to at least give it a read on this first section. And whilst you do that, I think it would be, we have 20 minutes, so I think we can reasonably do this and have a small presentation of each of the participants.
Thank you, Gianluca, and thank you, João, for making time for this. So I think that we kindly ask the trainees to read the mock project during lunch break, and we'll meet here at 2 o'clock sharp to restart. João, perhaps you would like to leave some other guidelines?
I think it's okay. In the second part of this session, we'll be going through the 5 steps that make up this canvas approach to DMP creation, or to at least this exercise. So please keep in mind the exercise guide. Don't be overwhelmed with the multiple tables for each step. They're just there for reference, as you will not be filling out any values. It's okay, but you are expected to discuss it amongst yourselves. I'll give you time to do that in each of the steps. And we can come to an agreement, or at least the idea of this whole exercise is not necessarily to create a very fully fledged DMP, but to have you start to consider the multiple conceptual stages of DMP creation. So obviously, if you were creating a DMP for practical usage, the process is a bit different. It's not as structured. It's a bit more ambiguous. But well, in time, you might come to learn that. But today, it's all about the concepts and keeping it simple. So I know that some of you have already done this exercise. So it's going to be fun, I'd say. So have a nice lunch, everyone.
Yeah, have a nice lunch, everyone. See you at 2 o'clock.
Okay.
Ciao, ciao.
See you.
Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.
George, can you stop recording, please?